Hey everyone, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm somebody who absolutely loves books. I mean, look around. I've got full shelves. Thankfully, they're not overflowing yet. But recently, I've made a pretty significant change in my book buying habits, and I wanted to share that journey with you. Over the past few months, I've dramatically changed the amount of books that I am purchasing, and that is not an indicator that I'm falling out of love in reading. In reality, this change is intentional and it is something I'm very proud of. So today, I wanted to chat with you about why I'm buying fewer books, how I'm making it work, and some unexpected benefits that I've noticed. Let's start with the biggest reason why I'm buying fewer books. And this is money. The reality is that purchasing books adds up, and the price of buying books has gone up quite a bit in the last half decade alone. First and foremost, I'm in the process of increasing my emergency fund. While it was at a healthy level, I feel the need to make it cover more months than it was currently going to be able to cover. I feel like the general adage of 3 to 6 months is pretty great advice. However, with the way things are right now, I feel the personal need to have more on the lines of 9 to 12 months of expenses set aside. And I know that this sounds pretty boring, especially when you compare it to the dozens of books that are sitting on bookshelf stores calling my name. But the reality is there's a lot of economical uncertainty right now, and I don't have a lot of control in the economy, but what I do have control in is what I can control. And what I can control is financially preparing myself as well as I possibly can to be able to survive any storm that I may have to go through. I work in healthcare in a setting with a lot of clinical trials and medical research, and typically that's a pretty stable industry. However, with changes at the federal government level regarding funding of projects and grants, this has impacted hospitals in a way that I personally haven't seen in my lifetime. And quite frankly, that's scary. So when I ask myself, would I rather have a book or would I rather have financial stability in the event that something does occur, that decision is pretty easy for me to make, as much as I would like the book. The second financial factor motivating my changes is that I, at some point, would like to be a homeowner. And I'm in a position now where that looks like it may actually be a feasible opportunity within the next couple of years, if not sooner. And that means saving money for a down payment on a house. And with the price of housing nowadays, that's a decent chunk of change. Although I am very fortunate that I live in a lower cost of living area as compared to other cities in the United States. So, speaking of housing, that brings up another practical concern. I am likely moving in less than a year, whether that's buying a property, which is a little less likely, or renting a new space. The reality is, I'm probably going to have to downsize if I rent another space. Rent prices have gone up, and I simply can't get for the same monetary value what I got for this place 4 years ago when I started renting it. And I've moved several times in my adult life. And let me tell you, boxes of books are heavy. The more books I have, the more boxes of books I have. And that means that I don't want to be taking books along with me that I'm not excited to read or think I'm going to want to reread at some point. I want to move the books that I'm excited to have on my shelves, that I'm excited to read. And therefore, I'm buying less books right now so that I'm not adding to the problem of future me and moving. So now when I'm shopping for a book, I'm thinking, is this a book that future me is going to be willing to move? And if the answer is no, there's a good chance that that book stays on the shelf and doesn't come home with me, which is a good thing for my wallet, sad thing for my soul. And here's the part that's a little harder for me to admit, but my reading habits have changed, and I am currently reading fewer books in a given month than I used to. And when I think about it, I really think that my book buying habits should reflect my reading habits. And the truth is, I've been more stressed lately, whether that's from work, financial planning, or really just the state of the world right now. And when I'm stressed, reading a book sometimes takes more mental energy than I honestly have. Instead, I find myself gravitating toward mindlessly watching YouTube videos or scrolling on Instagram. It's not necessarily healthy, but it is easier, and sometimes easier is exactly what I need. I used to beat myself up thinking that I should push myself to read more, but in all honesty, this isn't sustainable. If I'm only reading 1 or 2 books a month instead of 6 to 7, then it doesn't make sense for me to buy 6 or more books a month. And quite frankly, that only sets me up for guilt and frustration. And I don't need that added guilt and frustration in my life at the current time. And I've realized that going through phases where I read less isn't a bad thing. The reality is there are just seasons of life in which reading is not as much of a priority as it used to be. The problem for me comes when my book buying is outpacing my reading ability. When I started looking at my shelves and all the unread books, instead of feeling excited, I felt guilty and completely overwhelmed. And that's not the relationship I want to have with books. I want to look at books and I want them to bring me joy. I want to be excited for the future adventures that those books hold in store for me. But in order for that to happen, I currently need to buy less books. Now, you might be wondering, if I'm buying less books, how am I still filling my book loving heart with stories? And that's a great question. And I do have several strategies that are working for me. First, and most importantly, my library is absolutely amazing. Their physical collection is astounding. They're constantly getting in new releases. If they don't have a new release on their list, I have the ability to request it. And a good amount of the times, they will go ahead and purchase it. And then I'm the first person on the hold list. Also, I have other libraries that are within my commuting distance, and I'm able to get a library card. And so if you haven't visited your library recently, I highly recommend you do so. If you're disappointed by their collection, see if there's another library within a commutable distance to you that you can get a library card for, because you don't necessarily need to be restricted to the library that you are necessarily zoned to. The best part about the library is that it's like shopping for books, except completely free. And that makes me really happy. My library also participates in the interlibrary loan program. And if the book has been out for at least a year, they can help me get it from another library. Even if that library is 200 miles away, they can get it in for me. I can read it. I can give it back to my current library, and they will ship it to the library it belongs to. The second piece of this that belongs to the library is that I have really taken advantage of the digital library systems such as Libby and CloudLibrary. I believe some people have access to Hoopla. And this is a game changer, particularly with audiobooks, although they do have ebooks too if you love your e-reader. The quality of these audiobooks are just as good if you bought them on Audible, except you didn't pay $15 for them. And so if you're getting bored of it, you just DNF it and there's no financial attachment to it. And so it's easier to do that. At least I find so mentally. And the third might be my most revolutionary concept, and that is reading the books I already own on my bookshelves. Shocking. I don't think anybody has ever thought of that before. I know, I'm a genius. But in all reality, when I started going through my shelves at the thought of like getting rid of some books, I discovered that there were so many books that I am genuinely excited to read. And I just needed to refresh myself on that by shopping my own shelf. There are quite a few books I bought years ago that now I feel like I'm in the perfect phase of life and my reading tastes are perfectly aligned, that those books that have been sitting there unread, it's now their time to shine. Now, it's not that I don't buy books, but when I do go book shopping, I am intentionally asking myself, am I planning on reading this book in the next couple of weeks? Not am I planning on reading this eventually or at some point, except if there's this heck of a steal of a deal. I love a clearance book sale or a library book sale, but I've reined myself in. Thinking like this has dramatically reduced my impulse buys, not claiming that it's reduced it completely. And finally, I paused my physical book subscription service. And while I like the idea of a physical book subscription service, it's a curated set of books you get to pick or they pick for you. They ship it directly to your house and you have a constant influx of new books. But in reality, the book service I was choosing was Book of the Month, and there were several months that the books didn't excite me. And while I do have the ability to skip, sometimes I would forget to. So putting it on pause is giving me a couple months to really think about whether or not I want to cancel the service long term. And the other factor is when I was getting these, I was getting them faster than I could consume them, especially when you think about the fact that I had other books on my shelves and library books that I was coming in. And so I think pausing the subscription was the right decision for me. What has probably been the most surprising part of this process is the benefits I have discovered by buying less books. First, there is so much less decision fatigue when it comes to picking out what book I'm going to read next. If you have less books, you have less choice within those books. And so for me, I spent less time contemplating on which book was going to be the perfect book to read next. Should I read the book I just got? Or is it time to read that book that's been collecting dust for 6 months? And then I'd feel guilty about not reading the book that had been there for 6 months or a year. And with having less books, there's just less of that. And quite frankly, the amount of frustration and decision fatigue and analysis paralysis is just ridiculous and something that I don't need to that extent in my life. Reading is supposed to be fun, not overwhelming. Second, and I've not experienced this yet, but I believe that by doing this, I'm also going to experience more 5-star reads, which is a glorious reading experience. Because if I'm intentionally buying books, I'm very specifically choosing what comes into my house. I'm easier to DNF because it's a library book. There is less guilt to that. I think that means I'm going to increase my likelihood of finding a new 5-star read. And hopefully I will have more 5 stars than I did last year. That's the goal. And I've already touched on this, but there is so much less guilt surrounding the infamous pile of shame you hear most readers talk about when they refer to their ever-growing TBR pile. If there's less books, there's less guilt. And there shouldn't be guilt to begin with, but it is something that I experience. And so knowing that I have the power to implement systems that reduce this is a plus. And another added benefit, which was not intentional, but I do feel like is important, is the environmental aspect. Buying fewer books means that there's less shipping, there's less packaging of those books, whether to me or a bookstore, and just less overall consumption, which is good for the planet. I know that my singular person's book buying habits is not going to save our planet, but it is nice to know that I am doing a tiny bit better than I used to be in terms of being environmentally friendly, just by reducing my book buying habits. And the thing that surprised me the most is that I'm genuinely more excited about the new books that I buy because I'm so focused on making sure that what I buy is exciting, that I want to read it right away. It means that the books on my shelves, I'm so much more excited to get into. I'm ready for their adventures. And that makes me happy. And so that brings us to the next question, which is, where do I go from here? And for me, that's a very clear choice. It's decluttering my current book collection. I want to be real honest with myself about which books I really want to read and which ones are just taking up space on my shelves. I'm going to let you guys in on something that I don't think I've shared publicly before, but I have hoarding tendencies, and hoarding as a mental illness is something that runs on both sides of my family tree. And so making active decisions to declutter is something that I have to do to keep those at bay. And for me, this doesn't mean getting rid of hundreds of books. It doesn't mean becoming a minimalist. In all honesty, I don't think I could, because quite frankly, I love things. Things make me happy. But if I'm honest with myself, there are definitely books on my shelf that I bought in a different phase of life. I was interested in different stories, and now my interests don't align with those same books. And they're not getting the time and attention they deserve from me. And so it's time to give them to a new home where they will get the time and attention they deserve. My plan is to go through every book in my collection systematically and ask myself, do I have the plans to read it? Is it something that I want to reread And is it something that I am willing to move in a few months? If the answer to all three questions are no, then it's probably time to part with that. I will have difficulties when the answer is yes to some of those questions, but those are questions that I think can keep me on track when I go through the decluttering process. And I would like to reward myself at the end by actually cataloging all of my books. I've even purchased a library scanner to do this. And I'm thinking that I'm either going to donate these books to little free libraries and or some combination of selling them to used bookstores because I do love a good used bookstore. And I do feel good about doing this because I genuinely want these stories to end up in the hands of the right individual. And I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that everybody should buy less books. This is a completely personal decision for me right now at this current time. If you're somebody who reads everything you buy or having a large collection makes you happy, you have the space to do so, it doesn't financially or mentally stress you out in any way, then by all means, continue your current book buying habits. But on the other hand, if you're feeling overwhelmed or if your life circumstances has changed, or even if you're just curious about if buying less books would be a good option, then maybe some of the strategies that I've implemented will work for you too. At least I hope they do. The goal isn't to stop loving books or even stop buying books because as a book lover, I'm gonna buy books. However, for me, it's about being more intentional about what books I'm bringing into my space currently. It's about making sure that my reading habits and current life circumstances are aligning with my book buying habits. And in all honesty, at some point in the future, I might start buying more books again. I might want a room in my house that can be just a library room and have hundreds and hundreds of books and an endless supply of reading options. But currently, that's not where I am, and it doesn't make sense for the current life season I'm in, as much as I would love my own library. So my question for you is, have you ever gone through a phase where you've bought less books? And if so, what were some of the reasons, whether unconscious or consciously, that contributed to that? If you're a book lover, don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you're new, and set the notification bell so that you receive alerts and don't miss out on any of my bookish shenanigans or life shenanigans because there are quite a few. And I will see y'all in the next one. And I wish you happy reading. Bye, y'all.